There is a video on YouTube featuring Professor Mercer from the NBC series The Irrational. In Professor Mercer's class, he informed the students that he would play a recording of people chanting, "That is embarrassing." He asked them to pay close attention and write down what they heard after the 4th repetition. Let's play the audio.
That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing! That is embarrassing!
Almost all of his students heard, "That is embarrassing." After that, he played the same audio and asked the students to watch the screen and write down what they heard.
That is embarrassing! 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 That is embarrassing!
Almost everyone wrote Bart Simpson bouncing, even though they heard the same chanting throughout. The professor shared something very interesting with his students. Our eyes and ears take in electrical signals, which our brains interpret based on our expectations. We don't see reality, we see our reality. Well, this made me share this hidden knowledge of perception, which will help you understand reality more accurately. How we see the world is called perception. It happens when our brains take in information from our senses like seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Instead of just soaking in this info, our brains actively put it together using what we've sensed before and how we think. Reality, on the other hand, is what's really there, not based on how one person sees it. It stays the same no matter what we think. But getting to know this true reality is hard because we always see it through our own way of looking at things. How we see things is interesting because it's personal. Two people can look at the same thing and see it differently. This happens because of our own experiences, culture, and feelings. Because of this, people might have different ideas about what's really happening. The study of perception explores illusions and cognitive biases, revealing how our brains can misinterpret information. Optical illusions, for example, reveal the brain's tendency to fill in gaps or make assumptions. Similarly, cognitive biases can shape our perceptions, leading to systematic errors in judgment. Take the optical illusion of the blue-black dress photo as an example. You might have seen it on the internet. People got really interested because everyone saw the colors differently. The trick in the picture happens because of how our brains understand the light in the image. Some folks see the dress as blue and black, while others see it as white and gold. This happens because our brains work a bit differently for each person. It's like a cool example of how our eyes and brain see things in their own way. Even though the dress is the same, people see it differently because of how their brains work. This shows that what someone thinks is real can be different from what another person thinks, even if the actual thing is the same. It's like a reminder that everyone sees the world in their own special way. Another example of an optical illusion is the rotating snake's illusion. In this illusion, a series of concentric circles with a pattern of contrasting colors appears to rotate continuously. However, the image itself is static. There is no actual rotation. The illusion is created through the interaction of color and pattern, tricking our brains into perceiving motion where none exists. This type of optical illusion highlights how our brain processes visual information, often leading to misinterpretations of static images. The way we understand the world, or our perception, affects what we believe is true. These beliefs, in turn, influence the way we behave. Our perception can be manipulated in various ways, and this manipulation can lead to changes in how we see and understand things. For example, when we watch the news or see ads, they can make us see things in a certain way. If our friends or a group we're part of has a strong opinion, it might affect what we think too. Our brains also have habits, like always believing things that match what we already think. If someone purposely tells us things that aren't true or tries to make us believe something false, it can mess up how we see the world. The result of all this can be a not so true understanding of what's happening, liking things we wouldn't usually like, or believing stuff just because we heard it a lot. It can affect how we make choices, what we think about things, and even how we see the world around us. Knowing about these things is important to have a more correct and independent view of the world. While researching this, I came across a very interesting video. The following speaker is Mark Passio, an independent researcher and former occultist, who explains very well the entire psychology of perception versus reality. It will blow your mind. Keep in mind that Mark is a former occultist, so the upcoming content is considered hidden knowledge. So sit tight and watch it until the end.
When people say perception is reality, nothing could be farther from reality than that statement. Perception is not reality. It is just what it says, perception, seeing through, perceive, to see through something, like a lens or a filter. I perceive things differently without these glasses. That's one perception. When I put them on, I perceive things quite differently and more clearly. Well, that's how human perception works, like a lens. It's a filter. But what's there is the same thing. All that changes how I perceived it. So let's look at this concept. Truth is objective. That means that it's not dependent upon the perceptions of human beings. No one wants to hear that. That is a direct assault, a direct frontal assault on the human ego. Because everybody wants to hear, my perceptions are important. And we want to also believe my perceptions are accurate. Now people will say, well, what makes you say your perception of this topic is going to be accurate? That's because I went through the process of having to admit over and over and over and over and over again, endlessly, how wrong I was about my former perceptions. I went through that destructive process of breaking down my former belief systems, of breaking down my former emotional patterns, of most of all, changing my behavior. That's the thing that's the most destructive because we get attached to our behaviors and patterns. So asking people to change, I recognize it's not easy. It took me probably about 8 years of my life to do it. Most people don't want to spend a minute on creating personal change, let alone 8 years. Human beings' perceptions are capable of wavering. They can waver slightly from the truth, and they can waver wildly from the truth. What truth is that which does not waver. It doesn't move. It's that which is. It doesn't matter what anybody thinks about it. It doesn't matter whether anybody believes it. It doesn't matter whether anybody knows it. It doesn't matter whether anybody sees it. It doesn't matter whether anybody wants to see it. It's there. It's always been there. It's always going to be there. Nothing anybody does can change what has happened. Can anybody change what has already occurred in what we call the thinking of linear time, the past? Not one person here is capable of doing that. Let me tell you something. Not one being in the entire manifested universe is capable of doing that. Because that which has already occurred is set in the record of the universe. Nothing can change the past, ever. You know what can be altered? The future. And you know where the alteration of the future begins? In the present moment. That's exactly right. That's the only place it begins. So what truth is, the demystified concept of truth, is it's simply that which already exists. It's that which has happened in the past and is happening in the present moment. The truth does not exist in the future. When we get to those future moments and it's the present, truth will be existent then, but not until. So there is no such thing as truth in the future. Truth is that which has occurred in the past and that which is occurring in the present. It is simply that which is and that which has been. Please recognize when I use the word truth, that is all I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the mind of God. I'm not talking about the entire reason for the existence of the universe. I'm talking about the events that have taken place in the past and are taking place in the present. That's all. And guess what? That's all the truth is. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Now, I want to ask people to imagine, see these white lines? Imagine these white lines that do not waver as truth. And imagine that the perception that is set against the truth, we're going to take 3 different individuals. This is individual A, this is individual B, this is individual C. Their ability to perceive what has occurred and what is occurring is what I would refer to as consciousness. Consciousness is a being's ability to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to those patterns. Meaning you have an accurate understanding of what's taking place within and around you, or you have an inaccurate understanding of what's taking place in and around you. If your consciousness is high, meaning it's at a high frequency, okay, that means you're going to have more of an ability to understand and recognize the patterns. If your consciousness is low, you're at a low frequency, you're going to see the pattern less. You're not going to accurately perceive. So I liken this to a waveform. In simple, physics, a wave, this is a simple sine wave, okay? It has its crest here and its trough here, okay? And then the pattern repeats, goes up to the crest, down to the trough, and it repeats over again. The distance between either crests or troughs of the wave is called the wavelength. The longer the wavelength, the shorter the frequency. What that means is how frequently is it going to be intercepting the line that represents truth? How frequently is it going to be aligned with this line, which we are calling truth? This is a low frequency vibration. It's a low frequency wave. A wave like this, if it was an audio wave, would produce a low frequency, would produce a low bass tone. As we go up to a higher frequency, you can see the wavelength is shorter, meaning that it intercepts the line which represents truth much more frequently. We can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 there. So this is a higher frequency vibration. When we go up to an even higher frequency, let's say person C has this consciousness, they have a higher frequency. And they're intercepting the line that represents truth, much more frequency. I won't count those out because there's a lot of them. The higher the frequency, the more in tune with truth we are. What would happen if this frequency became infinitely high? What would it become? It would be indistinguishable from a line. And therefore, someone would be aligned to that which is. The higher the level of consciousness or frequency, which is their perception of reality being accurate, not wavering as much from the truth, because it's hitting it in more places. This wave would turn into a line at some point, the higher the frequency went. Think about this in sound, right? You hear a low bass tone, it's like, then it goes up, and it would go eventually outside the range of human hearing, because the frequency went so high. Same concept here. The higher the frequency, the higher the perception of reality, the quality of the perception is going to be. The concept to keep in mind here is perception is not reality. It's the filter we see reality through. What the human being's work is to do is to align their perception to the reality which exists, which is truth. We need to set aside what we want the truth to be and look at what it is. What it is altogether different than what we want it to be. But until we recognize what it is, we're not even in a position to make an accurate diagnosis of what's going on and therefore create what we want it to be. So I'm going to give the first quote here. Travis Walton says in his book, Fire in the Sky, he said, "I have come to realize that the biggest problem anywhere in the world, the biggest problem anywhere in the world is that people's perceptions of reality are compulsively filtered through the screening mesh of what they want and do not want to be true." Now, when I read that in his book, I got chills up and down my spine because I said, this meshes exactly with what I'm talking about in my section, in my presentation called Truth versus Perception. And he's encapsulating it in a sentence perfectly. We want things to be true. That doesn't make it so. That's not what makes truth the way that it is. What makes truth is the way that it is what behaviors were taken and what is the actual effect in the manifested world. That's how things are, okay? It doesn't matter how we want them to be. They may be a completely different way right now than we want them to be, and I would say for the people in this room, they are a completely different way than we want them to be. But most people in the world, they kind of believe that they're the arbiter of truth. And that's a bad place to be in. That's a very, very low level of consciousness. To think that if I don't believe that it's this way, it's not this way. Many people are trapped in that state of mind.